15 days after the bloodbath in southern Israel, we're still waiting to figure out when we're going to be going into Gaza with our ground forces. That and much more on In Focus. Hi. So it was on October 7th that we had the largest single day of slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. Right now, the death toll is over 1,400, and we still don't know how many it's going to end up at. We have 210 confirmed hostages, and that's even after two of the hostages were released by Hamas on Friday night. So the number just keeps rising. The number of dead keeps rising. They said they've only been able to identify a quarter of the dead because their bodies have been charred, and it's very hard to identify them. And every day we see more and more footage of the bestiality of Hamas and how they treated their victims in their bloodbath on October 7th. So it's very clear that the imperative of wiping Hamas off the face of the planet remains, and that the government's decision that that is the goal of this war remains in place, and it continues to be an imperative. And yet here we are 15 days after it happened. We're in October 22nd, and we still don't know when we're going to go in. And I want to explain a little bit about what the dilemma is. So the first question that people are asking is, where is the United States on this, and how can we look at it? We have the Northern Front is heating up. Today, we buried a lone soldier from Silver Spring, Maryland, named Omer Balva, who made Aliyah in 2019 to serve in the IDF, and he was killed by Hezbollah mortar fire on Saturday night. Two of his comrades were wounded, so he was buried today. And that is just a testament to the fact that the Northern Front really does just continue to heat up. And it's just a question of time before that becomes a main effort. So one of the things that Israel is wrestling with now in our security cabinet is, can we commit all of the forces that we have down south to the offensive against Hamas? Do we have enough forces in the north to wage war against Hezbollah adequately? And where's the United States in this fight? We know two aircraft carriers, one in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Gerald Ford, another one in the Persian Gulf, the USS Eisenhower, and there are other U.S. assets apparently en route, but it's not clear what their mission is. President Biden said on his way home to the United States after he visited Israel last Wednesday that he had not given any commitment whatsoever, nor had he any intention of committing U.S. forces to fight Hezbollah in the event that Israel is attacked by Hezbollah from the north. So it's still unclear what precisely the role the United States is willing to play, will play, is playing today. There's been a lot of concern that really, because the United States has said to Israel, look, you're not allowed to open a front against Hezbollah, and they haven't passed that tripwire of making it, necessary to actually take massive action against them, and therefore you're not allowed to do so. And all you can do is return fire so long as they're shooting mortars and a limited number of missiles across the border. And when do we know that they pass a critical mass? Well, apparently when we're observing the strikes. So it's a question of, what role is the United States playing? Are they deterring Israel? Are they deterring Hezbollah, Iran? Or are they there to evacuate U.S. personnel from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Syria, in the event that it becomes untenable to maintain their troop presence there, or their civilian presence there, their diplomatic presence in Beirut? All of this is sort of unknown. I would assume, I'm certain that the Security Cabinet has a better idea, but it's one of the considerations is, where is the United States in this fight? How much are they actually with us, and how much are they really not at all with us? We already know that the United States forced Israel, compelled Israel, Biden admitted it, to open up Gaza to truckloads of supplies, which are operating under the Rubicon humanitarian assistance, but really its resupply to Hamas because Hamas controls all of Gaza. There's some people claiming now we have to look at northern Gaza and southern Gaza as two separate and discrete areas because we're sending 700,000 civilians from northern Gaza into southern Gaza, and after they pass the Gaza Wadi, the riverbed, that they're no longer going to be bothering Israeli offensive operations in Gaza, and therefore it's okay to give them humanitarian aid, and we'll be able to dry out Hamas in the north. There are conflicting views about whether that's the case or whether that's wishful thinking on the part of people who are trying to make the best of a bad situation, with the United States demanding that Israel allow resupply to Hamas under the euphemistic term humanitarian assistance. And in the meantime, again, we have 210 Israeli hostages being held by these monsters, and it's not clear how or if or in what fashion any of them will be released. And let's not forget that 30 of them are small children. We already saw the handiwork of Hamas on their victims on this side of the border in Israel. So we can only imagine in our worst nightmares what's going on to those 30 children right now. So we don't know. And so we don't know what is getting to Hamas. We don't know what isn't getting to Hamas. So the first question, the first parameter is, where is the United States? How strongly is the United States going to be supporting Israel? To what degree is it undermining Israel, etc.? So that's one of the imperatives. Another one, of course, is international. We see the rise of violent Hamas demonstrations over the weekend. 100,000 people showed up in London for a Hamas demonstration, and then they went out and started hunting down Jews and calling for genocide, and were not arrested. So we see that we have massive crowds in London. They're calling for murder of Jews. Prime Minister Sunak, who was here last week, but what kind of domestic political pressures is he feeling at home? Same in the United States. They had a very large, thousands and thousands of people demonstrating on behalf of Hamas in New York. We've had Jewish students harassed at Harvard, massive demonstrations at Harvard Business School, University of Chicago. Pro-Israel students and rabbis shouted down by Hamas, and none of the Jews are being protected by college administrators. To the contrary, so we're having this surge of anti-Semitic threats, assaults, and pro-jihad demonstrations, showing the emboldenment of these forces. And then the question is, what are the political pressures that the governments in the West are going to face on the one hand, and on the other hand, they realize that it's also a threat to them, but also, do they have the courage to stand up to it and stand with Israel? All of these are questions. So, the imperative here is to move as quickly as possible before the pressures on Western governments become too hot for them to handle. And again, the Biden administration, they're continuing with their overall policy of appeasing Iran. They're not reinstating sanctions, not on oil exports, not the UN snapback sanctions because Iran is breaching the nuclear deal, nothing. So they're continuing on with that policy. On the one hand, they're also calling $100 million in humanitarian aid to Hamas. And they're also saying, we want the Palestinian Authority, which is a partner with Hamas, in charge of Gaza when you're done. So you're getting a lot of mixed signals. So first, you have the Biden administration. What do they want? Second, you have the international community. Are we going to get any support, any backing, or are we going to be immediately sent to the UN Security Council to be condemned and then have to beg the Biden administration to veto anti-Israel Security Council resolutions? The third parameter is operational, and here this, of course, is supposed to be the only imperative, the only thing that's supposed to be directing Israel's planning on how to go in, when to go in, where to put our focus of effort, whether in the north or in the south, or both. Can we do both? The operational imperative is supposed to be the only thing that we're thinking about. But again, I put it as a third parameter because of the dominance in Israel's strategic calculus of where the United States is and what kind of backing we can receive internationally, and how much is the international community, such as it is, both the Arab world and Europe, going to be supporting Hamas or leaving us alone to fight. And so these are actually the things that seem to be paramount right now, which is a problem, because the only thing we should be caring about in this situation is the operational imperative. And here there's a debate. As I wrote in my column at JNS on Friday, first of all, I, along with many, many other Israelis, feel that both in light of the first and second imperative, and also because of the momentum of battle after what we suffered on October 7th, that it's very, very important to finally just go in and start the fight on the ground and kill these bastards, right? And there's a real sense that, we have to just take it to them. We have to kill them. They can't be allowed to continue breathing in and out on this earth if the Jewish people are to be free. They just can't, and we just have to take it to them. And that's true. And when we see that there's like this, the sands in the clock of American and international willingness to see the Jews defend themselves, the sands are going out of the hourglass. So, go already, just move. And there are reports that the army is ready and they want to go in, and they're waiting for the order from Netanyahu and the war cabinet. But then there's another school of thought that I wrote about on Friday, which is what Major General Reserve Yitzhak Brick put forward in an interview last week, which really gave a lot of people pause, including, I think, the government. She said, look, these terrorists in Gaza are burrowed in tunnels. There are 40,000 terrorists sitting pretty in tunnels, and they have everything mined around them. And they can jump out of tunnels and slaughter our soldiers, and we won't know where they are. We don't have a proper mapping of the tunnel network, and we have to wait them out. We have to attrit them, and we attrit them by having a complete embargo on all aid, all supplies to Gaza. So, to get the only way that we can beat them, General Brick said, was by forcing them out of the tunnels, by denying them electricity, by denying them air, by denying them food, by denying them water. And you only do that over, a period of weeks and months, so that they have no supply, they have no food, they become exhausted, they can't breathe, no electricity, no generators, because they're operating on generators, so no fuel going into Gaza, nothing. Because like I said, the humanitarian aid is aid for Hamas. Anything that comes in that Hamas thinks is valuable, they'll take. So if you're bringing in fuel to Gaza, then that's going to go to fuel the generators that Hamas uses in their underground warren of tunnels. So Brick's concept, his operational concept, was attrition. Wait. Because so long as they're under the tunnel, they have the decisive advantage. And the only way for the IDF to annihilate these monsters is to force them above ground. And you force them to ground by giving them no capacity to remain in place. And once they start going up to the surface, that's when we kill them. That's when we go in with our forces. And there's a lot to be said for that operational concept. But if you have the Biden administration demanding resupply, and they are, and of course they're supported by the entire international community, such as it is, and Egypt is threatening to go to war with Israel, literally, if we push the Gazans out into the Sinai, or lest we continue to pressure them to take them, or whatever, and Sisi appears to just be mouthing all of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that we've getting from the Muslim Brotherhood, from Daesh, from Hamas, etc., and in his own words. So this is the guy that's the moderate. This is the guy who visited a Coptic church when he came into power to show that he was not going to continue the Muslim Brotherhood government's policy of oppressing the Christians, and talking about tolerance in Islam, but now he's just mouthing the same propaganda that that Al Jazeera is putting out against the Jews. So we're in this situation where the United States is essentially undermining BRICS operational concept, which is the concept that makes the most rational sense from an Israeli perspective, so that we minimize the losses to our forces, and we're able to properly annihilate Hamas. So there's a question: do we have the firepower? Do we have the capacity to invoke any kind of surprise? Operational surprise when, we have all of these reporters from all over the world taking pictures and giving the locations of our troops, and everything's getting leaked, and shouldn't we just move in? So that's the dilemma from an operational perspective. Is time of the essence? Should we run in, or is time on our side and we should wait and attrit them? Do we have the capacity to attrit them, given the American position that we have to resupply Gaza? So, and then a fourth parameter, which I think is the most surprising and increasingly salient one, is the domestic political situation, which is something that, frankly, most of us hadn't thought we were going to face this early on in the war. There were, if you recall back in the, in the BS days before the slaughter, BH days before the Holocaust in the South, we had we had the left that was, in rebellion, waging an insurrection against the Netanyahu government, right? And they started to really lose their hold on their own camp just before all of this started, when on Yom Kippur they started attacking Jews on the streets of Tel Aviv and Ramat Aviv and Givatayim and Zichron Yaakov and Haifa, because they were trying to pray outside on Yom Kippur. And that really placed them, for the first time, it exposed them as just truly radical and out of step with the Israeli national consensus. So they were sort of they were beginning to be sidelined as a result of the revelation in the eyes of many, the opening of the eyes of many people who had thought they just believe that democracy means that our elites have complete power, and and may have even sympathized with that view. So they were kind of on the rails, and then this act of slaughter occurred, and for the first week or so they were quiet, and they joined the army. And then the billionaires behind them started funding this massive drive to support the communities of the South. And very impressive, which is easy when you have, endless amounts of money at your disposal, which is what they've clearly shown to themselves to have over the past year. So they started this whole thing, and they're trying to really rebuild their reputation, because for a year they tried to destroy the army by calling for reservists not to serve, and did enormous damage to the reserve force of the Air Force during this period, and some of the commando units. So, they're trying to present themselves as patriots, as Zionists, all the rest of it. So, a lot of people on the right were looking at this and saying they're exploiting a situation, but mainly we just said, well, good, if they have the money and they have the wherewithal, then it's great that they're doing this, and let's just, in the spirit of national unity, let's try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's not, jump to judgment or whatever. And the problem is that already starting, in some cases on October 7th, but certainly, in the last week and a half, we've seen something really ugly starting in Israel, which is that you're getting the left organized to try to blame the slaughter on Netanyahu. So the first thing that I saw was Ronen Sur, this PR executive who was one of the big ad men who were pushing the whole anti-Netanyahu campaign over the past year, anti-right-wing campaign over the past year. He held a press conference for the families of the kidnapped hostages, and he sort of took ownership over their plight, and then he used his position to blame Netanyahu for the hostage crisis, which is pretty amazing. And they've had some falls, like they had this big, they had a demonstration outside of General Staff headquarters in the Kiryat Tel Aviv, where they were calling Netanyahu a murderer, and one of the mothers of one of the kidnapped people started screaming at them, and she was on TV screaming at them, telling them to shut up, and how they've been so responsible for so much discord in Israel, and so but they don't have any shame. They just keep going. So that's one thing that they have done, and they started that immediately. And then now, and it's mainly the most powerful component of this is inside of the television studios themselves in Channel 11, 12, and 13. They're pushing this line that Netanyahu is responsible for this whole mess. And it flies in the face of the news report that they themselves are being forced to report, which is that the generals had a telephone conference at 4 o'clock in the morning on October 7th, where they started seeing that there was a real prospect that Israel was going to be invaded by Hamas in Gaza the following day, and yet they didn't update the prime minister or the defense minister. It was the chief of staff, it was the general of the Southern Command, the head of military intelligence, the head of the Shabak. And not only did they not tell the prime minister and the defense minister, they didn't tell the Gaza Division Command. So many of the soldiers who were killed on October 7th were killed while they were asleep because nobody woke them up. So this was an incredible operational failure by the general staff of the army, and yet at the same time that they're saying that Netanyahu wasn't informed. And in fact, I just saw a latest report that on October 2nd, so 5 days earlier, there was a cabinet meeting, and the Shabak and the IDF both recommended that Netanyahu allow more Gazans into Israel for work, because that would buy us quiet from the Gaza Strip for the foreseeable future. And so I mean, we have reports that there were Gazans who had work permits came into Israel and mapped every single house in the kibbutzim that they overran, to the point where they knew how many people lived in each house, which house had dogs, what kind of dogs they were, how many children were in each house, how many parents were in each house, etc., so that they knew precisely from house to house how many people they were looking for. So that was the result of the spying that was done by these workers who the army and the Shabak were insisting had to be allowed into Israel. So, but it doesn't matter. All the same, you see in all of these studios, they're blaming the whole thing on Netanyahu. They're calling him a murderer. And this is being backed up by increased operations by the Kaplan brigades, by Brothers in Arms, and by all these organizations. And it's very disturbing. And then, and this goes into what do we do about the war then? So they're now even coming out with their own war aims. So I saw this very clearly last night when I went online. It works out that Tom Friedman, our great friend, wrote an article that came out a few days ago in the New York Times called Israel is About to Make a Terrible Mistake. And Friedman, I have to say, he's really exposed himself as a cold-hearted, calculating man who's motivated not by any sort of rationality, but by a true antipathy, a true hatred for Israel. I mean, I think it came out very clearly. Like, you see people like Michael Walzer, who's not pro-Israel, and I didn't see it, but a friend of mine was telling me that he was interviewed by the Free Press website, and he acknowledged, that this is a just war. He said, it may not be carried out through just means, but Israel's war against Hamas is just. And Walzer could say that, but Tom Friedman, no. I mean, he said he accused Netanyahu of being the head of a messianic coalition. That and the thing is that what he said was that Israel's going to destroy America's position in the Middle East if we don't leave the room open for a Palestinian state. That we have to make clear at the outset of our operation in Gaza that we plan to withdraw from the West Bank and give all of our land to the Palestinians. And he has this idea that the Palestinian Authority, he insists always, he has since he was in Beirut in 1982 during the Lebanon War, that the PLO is not really a terrorist organization, or the Palestinian Authority, which is the PLO in Judea and Samaria, that they're moderate and they can be trusted. And this is also the line that President Biden has been trying to sell. So we need a two-state solution. We need to give our land, more land, right, to these terrorists. So as I wrote on Friday, just for knowing, the Palestinian Authority is 100% with Hamas in this war. And they declared jihad against Israel on Friday. There was a directive put out to all the imams in the mosques in the Palestinian Authority. Friday is their main prayer day, Friday afternoon prayers, and of what to say in their sermons. And the sermon was saying that that they need to join the jihad, the genocide of the Jews, and the press release cited the hadith saying that they will only liberate Jerusalem and build their state after, the tree talks to them and says, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me," or stone will say to them, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him," right? So this is a Palestinian Authority directive to Palestinian Authority salaried imams in the mosques in Judea and Samaria, calling for them to tell the people, the Palestinians of Judea and Samaria, to join the jihad against Israel. And this is the Palestinian Authority that Tom Friedman, along with Joe Biden, is insisting should be receiving control of Gaza after Israel flushes out Hamas, and also that Israel has to give these people a state, these jihadists a state in Judea and Samaria, and end all the Israeli communities, the Jewish communities, annihilate the Jewish communities that, 500,000 and more Israelis live in Judea and Samaria. And so what Tom Friedman said in his article was that if Israel doesn't make this announcement ahead of our invasion of Gaza, that it's going to destroy all chance of peace. It's going to destroy our peace agreements with the Egyptians. It's going to destroy America's position. It's going to endanger the Americans in the region, and everything's going to be Israel's fault. And it's all going to be because Netanyahu is ruled by these messianic, Jews who he needs in order to continue to rule. And he attributed the worst intentions to Netanyahu and to his coalition partners. He had literally zero, understanding of any sort of operational imperative in light of what we just suffered on October 7th. There's been no switch in Tom Friedman's brain to make him reconsider the idea that the main problem in the region is Israel and not these jihadists who want to annihilate not only Israel, but, if you look at the streets of Washington, of Detroit, where you just had Samantha Wall, the president of a Jewish synagogue there, was found stabbed to death outside of her house, and nobody knows the cause of death yet, but we can only surmise what had happened to have been in this city, in this state that has such a large and radical Muslim population in it, including in Detroit. We're facing this, not only the Jews, but non-Jews. If you look at the footage from London, for instance, you see that the Muslims on the street in London are attacking the police. The same is true in Brooklyn. There was a Hamas rally in Brooklyn over the weekend, and they were attacking police. And they're going after America. They're cursing the United States of America. So this isn't just Israel's fight. I mean, we saw on 9/11, we saw on 7/7, we saw in Madrid, we saw in Beslan in Russia, we saw in Mumbai in India, that anywhere that forces of jihad feel emboldened, they attack and they slaughter. That's what they do because they want to control the world in the name of Islam. And the Jews are their first target. They hate us the most. But they don't only hate us. They hate everybody who isn't just like them. But Tom Friedman doesn't see that. In his article, he blamed everything on the Jews, on the bad Jews, on Jews like me, on Jews like Bezalel Smotrich, on Jews like Benjamin Netanyahu. We're the bad guys in this, not the Hamasniks who were raping our women and beheading our children and carrying out unspeakable crimes against humanity against the Jews in southern Israel on October 7th. and are probably doing them in Gaza to the Jews that they took captive on October 7th. It's not them. It's us and anybody who supports us. And the thing is that Tom Friedman's article was immediately picked up, I saw, by, leaders of the anti-government insurrection and used as a means to argue that this government cannot be allowed to stand and that Netanyahu has to be ousted at the outset of a war because he can't be trusted because he's controlled by these messianics, and we have to listen to Joe Biden because he's our true leader. He's way better than Netanyahu, and we have to listen to Tom Friedman because he really understands what's best for Israel. And so, I look at this, and first of all, I'm just appalled, right? I mean, that they dare, that they have this kind of lack of shame that they can do this at the outset of the war without even thinking it. But I'm not surprised, right? Because the reason we got into this pickle is because we're surrounded by monsters who we haven't slain properly. And we have to do that now. But, how did we get into a position where Hamas is in charge of Gaza? Well, because our policy has been guided by these people who think that the main problem in this country is the Jewish right and not our enemies for the past generation and a half. 30 years ago, we just marked it last month, right? I mean, I have a special podcast about it, 30 years to the Oslo Accords. It was a disaster. We let terrorist armies enter into our heartland in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, and they proceeded to massively expand terrorism against Israel within just a month or two. And then they just took off. And in 2000, Hezbollah took over first South Lebanon and then through all of Lebanon because Israel withdrew from our security zone in South Lebanon under the direction of that brilliant strategist, Ehud Barak, who's behind this whole left-wing insurrection on May 31st, 2000, and just handed the whole area over to Hezbollah, massively emboldening and expanding their power. We had, in 2005, instead of finally defeating the forces of terror in the Gaza Strip as we had in Judea and Samaria beginning in 2002, Ariel Sharon decided that the best thing to do under the circumstances was to run away and transfer all of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, which in no time at all both lost the election because everybody understood that Israel left Gaza because of Hamas's terrorism, so they rewarded Hamas with a massive victory in the 2006 Palestinian elections. And then Hamas just ousted Fatah from power in June 2007 altogether, because why pretend anymore? There was no need for a fig leaf when you really are just in charge. So they ousted Fatah, and they've been ruling Gaza ever since. Never would have happened if we hadn't followed the left's prescription and left Gaza. Hezbollah really seized power in all of Lebanon, not just in South Lebanon, after Israel fought to a draw in the 2006 a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, right? If we had prosecuted that war even somewhat competently under the prime ministership of Ehud Olmert, Hezbollah wouldn't have been able to win the elections in Lebanon in 2008 and assert, end any question about the fact that they're the only power in that country. So, everything that we're facing today is because of the left. We can even look at our quandary with the United States of America as a function of the left's continued position that Israel's most important strategic resource in the entire world is American support, as opposed to our own power, our own firepower. So everything that we're facing is a result of the left's strategic concepts, which are all wrong and have all caused catastrophic failures for Israel over the past 30 years. And they never learn a lesson. And why don't they learn a lesson? Because instead of having a substantive discussion about policy, they blame everything on the right. They demonize everybody who questions them. Benjamin Netanyahu, all of the commentators, any politician who has a different view of things. Yuval Steinitz was demonized because he wanted to develop the Navy as a strategic force. All of these things, you can't have a discussion in Israel because if you raise an alternative policy, you're immediately demonized. And this owes, again, to their control over almost every single media outlet in Israel. So So the demonization of Netanyahu is both because they're obsessed with the hatred of him, but it's also because they want to escape any sort of culpability for their failed prognostications about how to handle the threat of jihadists and a jihadist regime on our doorstep. And, I don't want to talk about any of this. This hadn't been my intention to open this conversation, to have a conversation about what's happening domestically, but I find it so dangerous to see what's happening because, look, we have the first imperative is where does the United States stand on all of this? The second one is where is the international community, and are we going to be subject to massive isolation and condemnation in the halls of nations as soon as we go into Gaza? The third one, which should be the first one, is the operational imperative. How do we win? What's the best way to use the forces that we have? What's the best place to use our firepower? How are we going to defeat the enemy? We can't go into Gaza the way that we went into South Lebanon in 2006. We have to play to win. We don't have another option here after what they did. It's obvious that the only option that we face is total victory, and so we have to achieve it. How do we achieve it? Well, there are different questions about how that's best achieved. But the last thing is, how do we deal with the fact that the left is trying to overturn our government at the beginning of a war and corral us into a war policy that will be, again, a catastrophic failure even if we achieve the war aims, because it's putting us into a position where we're going to surrender to our worst enemies and look even weaker than we've looked since October 7th. So this is a really toxic situation that we find ourselves in, but we are in it, and we don't have any option other than the imperative of victory. I've heard some good things, encouraging things about the state of readiness of the IDF and even of the IDF General Staff that screwed up it's so cataclysmically, so catastrophically on October 7th that there is an understanding of the operational imperative. They have plans in place that make sense, that make the best use of Israel's advantages and minimize our disadvantages. And I feel much more comfortable after a lot of the updates that I've received over the past 18 hours than I did when I took off for Shabbat on Friday evening. So I'm feeling confident that we're capable of handling it. But again, 15 days after we were invaded and we faced a one-day Holocaust, it's clear that we can't just stand on the sidelines and that something's going to have to change in the next day or so, 2 or 3. And I guess the main prayer that we all have is that we're able to maximize our advantages internationally in terms of what we're facing from the United States and from Europe and from the Arab world, and also in terms of the capabilities that we have in our hands. And maybe my point in talking about what the left is doing is to make people aware of it so that hopefully they'll tamp down on their incitement, hopefully, so that we can keep our people unified and together and directed towards our common goal of defeating and annihilating Hamas, and to the extent that we're capable as well, Iran and Hezbollah, so that we'll be facing truly a different Middle East, a better Middle East, a safer Middle East for the Jews, for the Muslims, for the Christians, for all peoples of the region and throughout the world. So those are my thoughts for today, and we'll revisit all of this stuff in just a couple of days, and we'll find out where we are and just take a pulse. I'll also be joined here later this week by my friend, the great Victor Davis Hanson, so keep your eye on this channel. See you soon.